From the WATE.com Digital Center, answering your legal questions, this is Ask Isaacs. Now, here's Lori Tucker and attorney Greg Isaacs.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon to you. I'm Lori Tucker, along with our legal analyst, Greg Isaacs. Thank you, as always, for being here every Wednesday at 1:30 in the afternoon Eastern.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, today we're talking about a moment in court heard round the world. If you were on this planet 30 years ago, actually 31 years ago, in 1994, it was the O.J. Simpson murder trial. The former pro football player, commentator, movie star, larger-than-life personality, found not guilty in the horrific stabbing deaths of Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Ron Goldman. It was absolutely horrific. Let's take a listen to what happened when the jury came back with that verdict.
The jury in the above entitled action find the defendant Orenthal James Simpson not guilty of the crime of murder.
Yeah, you see the reaction, you see his reaction, you heard reaction, and you see Robert Kardashian there, the patriarch of the Kardashian family, now no longer with us, looking absolutely stunned. And he came out later saying, conjecture was perhaps that OJ indeed did it. For those of you who, again, weren't around when this happened, the not guilty verdict didn't mean public conjecture didn't happen. It also did not have an impact on what was to follow, and that's what we're talking about today, the civil court cases. So just because you're found not guilty in criminal court doesn't mean the civil case can't follow.
Absolutely, and there are two different standards of proof. In the criminal case, this deemed the case of the century, trial of the century. The legal standard was beyond a reasonable doubt, a very lofty standard that we have here throughout this country. But in a civil case, it's much different. It's a preponderance of the evidence. It's analogous to tipping the scales of justice 51 to 49%. And so a different standard of proof. The judge imposed different rules and a much different result.
And how was the evidence different? Weren't there lots of photographs and things like that where Simpson was pictured in different areas, and maybe 911 calls, more of those were used? What led to the decision?
What changed the landscape? And, this kind of came off the heels of Rodney King in Los Angeles, and there was a lot of jockeying on the venue for the trial, a lot of the specter of racism, and it was interesting because one of the lead detectives that was involved had given a pre-interview to an author that was writing a book, and in there, time and time again, he talked about how racist the Los Angeles Department was, made a lot of racial slurs.
Are you talking about Mark Furman?
Mark Furman, the F word, and Mark Furman F. Lee Bailey went to South Carolina and got access to those transcripts. And, that really brought racism to the forefront of the O.J. Simpson trial.
And that hurt that hurt the case. That hurt the defense, or the prosecution.
The prosecution got significantly damaged because Furman
went off the rails.
Had the blood. He kept the blood for a while. There was a chain of custody issue. So that was one of the dynamics that was at the forefront of the criminal O.J. Simpson case. But when you have the civil case, one thing the judge did from the very beginning was grant a motion in limine. Motions in limine typically means you're forbidden or excluded from going into this evidence or this topic on racism. So racism was not a part of the trial. The other thing that was different in the civil case, there were no cameras in the courtroom. And that makes, in my opinion, a huge difference because back in '94, back in the day, that's when I actually became a legal analyst for WATE.
You certainly did.
Was covering, the O.J. Simpson trial.
It's all everybody was talking about.
That's when Court TV had its infancy. And so what you saw is suddenly courtroom and lawyers became superstars. And you have a high-profile defendant like O.J., and it was like day after day, there would be something new, some drama, some evidentiary bombshell.
And it wasn't just national. Like you said, you were called in to come here and talk about it and analyze the case every day. And right back there, 30 years ago, my desk has not changed in all these years. And I had to call in. I was doing radio at the time with B97.5, and they called. They said, hey, we hear a verdict is coming in. Can you do a live report from your desk? So
Amazing.
it affected media everywhere.
But this is how this case, O.J. Simpson, gripped the nation. 94 million people watched the slow pursuit of when O.J. was in his Bronco with a passport,
A.J. Cowling driving.
in cash, and everybody was gripped. I was at dinner, and every TV was on, watching the white Bronco sales spiked as O.J. slow rolled the inevitable. And then they showed the police descending on his compound, and the nation was gripped ever since.
Absolutely. So now, fast forward 30 years later, and we have the family of Ron Goldman reaching a settlement with the people running Simpson's estate. Simpson passed away in April of last year due to prostate cancer. And we have a story on that decision, and then we'll kind of break that down and what that civil case entails and whether they will ever see any money. So let's take a look.
This morning, the estate of O.J. Simpson tells ABC it will accept a claim of roughly $58 million from the family of Ron Goldman. The question remains whether it will ever be paid in full.
Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime of murder.
In 1995, Simpson was famously acquitted in the murder trial of his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend, Ron Goldman. But O.J. was later found liable for their deaths in a civil trial and was ordered to pay their families more than $33 million. And the interest has been growing ever since. Simpson died of cancer last year at the age of 76. Goldman's family, at the time, said they'd received only a fraction of the money. An auction of O.J.'s belongings earlier this year raised about $300,000. But the executor of his estate, Malcolm Laverne, acknowledged to our Las Vegas affiliate there's a long way to go to cover Simpson's debts.
I'm hoping to get an estate that's somewhere in the neighborhood of close to $500,000. $500,000 compared to $70 million, $80 million with these liens. It's not realistic to think that that judgment is going to be satisfied.
The estate has planned to auction off more of Simpson's belongings, but there's another problem.
After he died, there was this California tax lien that broadsided me.
He says unpaid tax claims in California top $635,000. As for the Goldmans, they've been trying for decades to get what they're owed. In 2007, they were awarded the rights to Simpson's book, If I Did It, which included his so-called hypothetical description of the murders. As for the latest development, the family saying acceptance of the claim is a positive acknowledgement of the debt. However, it does not constitute payment. We will continue to monitor the probate process as it progresses. Maggie Bruley, ABC News, New York.
So yeah, Greg, it begs the question, will the Goldman family ever see justice in the form of compensation to the tune of $58 million?
Well, when you hear lawyers tell clients it's not about principle, it's about the legal system and how it works, this is a clear case of this aggressive post-judgment collection effort being about principle. And I think the Fred Goldman and his family realize they are not going to get $58 million. I think their initial computation of interest on the $33 million verdict in the civil case was $117 million. There are estimates that the O.J. Simpson estate is worth between $500,000, as we just heard, and maybe $3 million. But also behind the scenes, what you're trying to see is the Goldmans are trying to squeeze every penny they can get and try to punish the Simpson family as much legally as they can, because they have uncovered that there was a lot of transfers regarding real estate with the Simpson children, with the trust for the Simpson children.
Some property was quote unquote lost.
And what they tried to ask, and there was a bankruptcy involved, and this estate is asked for those monies to be clawed back because they were fraudulent. So what you're seeing is they're going to hurt the Simpson progeny and the family where they can at this point, and that's in the pocketbook. So a lot of very aggressive post-judgment collection efforts. But at the end of the day, do those big numbers mean anything? Probably not. To Fred Goldman, does it mean something? Absolutely.
Yeah. It's more than money. Yeah, you can tell with this family and how emotionally driven they have been. Obviously, these murders were absolutely a case of overkill in both of these cases. Absolutely horrific.
Well, and let's talk about this. You know, when you have OJ, he had an incredibly high-profile athlete, and he had a variety of careers and ways to make money. Now, typically, when you look at collecting a judgment, your pensions, IRAs are somewhat protected.
And he
legally.
had some pensions, not worth a ton of money.
Not worth from the NFL.
Yeah.
But also he had memorabilia. Remember, that's why OJ went to jail for 30 years, because he tried to rob somebody in Vegas that stole his memorabilia at gunpoint.
People at the time said, oh, the irony.
The irony, and I think the judge loaded up on him, not for committing a robbery over O.J. Simpson signed photographs and footballs, but because he walked. And, you know, when you talk about O.J. Simpson posthumously, there's always a way where money can be made. Because, for example, the book, you know, What If I Did It?
And people said he did that just for the money because he was really hurting financially.
But you have reruns, you have things that are still going on. So those are ways that there can be potentially unforeseen income that estate would generate. But you know, there's also going to be always the specter of, did he do it?
Right.
And you know, it was interesting. F. Lee Bailey, one of the lead famous lawyers,
who happened to be a friend of yours.
A colleague, a professional colleague. And last time he was here, Lee and I got to chat at the Copper Cellar, the Calhoun's on the River. And it was interesting. He made no bones about his feud with Robert Shapiro, who catapulted to fame in OJ.
Part of the Dream Team.
Part of the Dream Team. But Lee all but said OJ did it. I mean, so there was that undercurrent in the Dream Team with Johnny Cochran, his law firm, a Kardashian, when you had Shapiro, you had F. Lee Bailey, and you know, Lee was telling me there was always tremendous infighting among that defense group.
Yeah, we're hearing all these stories all these years later and through the years, especially from Kardashian before his death.
But having said that, what does that do? That says anytime there's a memoir that comes out, anytime, you know, there's a new revelation, anytime something comes to the forefront, the Goldman money, the Goldman judgment is going to be where that money goes, not the O.J. Simpson children. But, you know, the real battle right now is going to be the clawback efforts to take the money away from the O.J. Simpson heirs that Brown is saying should not have gone to them. It should have been...
Or Goldman.
Goldman.
Yeah.
To satisfy the $33 million judgment.
Want to take a moment here and look at a question. We always ask for your questions, your comments, and here's from Wendell Burkhart saying, I saw a lawyer last night saying this wasn't true. Don't know, but that's what he said. I'm not sure, Wendell, exactly what you mean about this case. Which part isn't true? The settlement? Is that what you're referring to? Or whether Simpson did it or not? So if you want to clarify that, we would love to explore that a little bit more. In the meantime, while we're waiting to hear perhaps from Wendell, and I hope we do, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back after this.
If it doesn't fit, you must acquit.
Yeah, that's the line, the famous line by Johnny Cochran that is still used today in different scenarios. Just in families, it just became that buzz phrase. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit. Talking about that glove that O.J. famously struggled with, whether it did indeed fit or not.
And you know, it was amazing talking about this case on Court TV and whatever, and here on ATE back in the day. You know, you never, ever ask the question you don't know the answer, and when the
Huge mistake.
And when the prosecution, and I can still see it vividly in my mind in that courtroom, asked to approach Judge Ito, granted permission, and they tried they asked him to try on that glove, and you know, there was no way in Hades OJ was going to make that glove fit. He, you know, his hand was out like this. He was like demonstrative tugging on the glove, and then masterfully, Johnny Cochran, in his very rhythmic Johnny Cochran-esque closing, where he eviscerated the prosecution, said, if it doesn't fit, you must acquit. And so at the time, that was a buzzword. That became part of pop culture, whatever.
And people said Johnny Cochran is brilliant.
But I remember a few years ago, voir diring a jury, and I said, it's kind of like if it doesn't fit, you don't quit. And I got this, you know, younger people, this kind of just dazed and glazed look, and then
They
I
thought,
realized,
oh, that's clever.
Yeah, they didn't know what the heck that meant.
Well, that's why we're doing a lot of background today for a lot of young folks who are joining us who maybe have heard about the case, but don't know all the background. So we're kind of going back over it for you.
A fascinating case that took months
Yeah.
to try, was a lot of pundits thought was over-tried, and there was a scandal or a revelation literally weekly, if not daily.
Marcia
and
Clark became a household where everybody involved in that case, everybody
Judge
knows their
Ito,
name. Lance Ito, yeah.
They became a meme, but really a significant development. But you know, it's interesting how many years later, over 30 years, and they're still trying to collect the judgment in this case. So very fascinating development, but it's also, you know, let's talk about.
There are other cases. You want to touch on that really quickly? And I believe we're getting ready to bring you some breaking news. But in the meantime, while we're pulling all that together, there are some other famous cases that have really riveted the nation and, in fact, the world when it comes to stuff like this. So let's talk about some of those. I mean, you know all these names.
If you are a criminal defense lawyer and you're representing your client and you get that parallel civil case, then you're fighting with the prosecution, but then you've got to battle on another flank that you've got to protect your client. And you know, it's happened in a lot of celebrity high-profile cases. Michael Jackson, Sean Diddy Combs, Bill Cosby. Bill Cosby shot himself in the foot giving depositions. Alec Baldwin is ongoing. So what you have is, you know, the plaintiff's lawyers want to hang on every word you say if your client's going to testify. They want to swoop in and get your discovery. So you're sitting there, you know, using the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination as not a shield, but a sword, and you're trying to put their lawsuits on hold because you're saying, if I give a deposition, if I comply with this discovery request, if I give you this document, you have violated or pierced my client's Fifth Amendment rights. So what you wind up doing is fighting two wars on two separate fronts. But then here's the thing, the dynamic. Now, OJ was different. If you get a guilty verdict, then it's Katie bar the door, res judicata, collaterally stopped. You can't deny someone, you know, was already found guilty of doing something. But in OJ, it was a little different because they had to work for their $33 million verdict. They actually had to have a trial. They had to have witnesses, and they had to win. But you know what? It's not the first time. But it also goes to show how even over 30 years later, the courts are still tied up with Orenthal, Simpson, and the mystery remains.
It really
Civil
does.
jury said he did.
Right.
Criminal jury said he didn't. Did he kill Nicole Brown Simpson? and Ron Brown.
It's a secret. If he knew, he took to the grave. Again, he passed away from cancer. O.J. Simpson did in April of last year. I'll leave it with this before we get to breaking news we're just getting, and that is, since there is a settlement with the Goldman family, will there be any other attempts to get the money, or is this it?
Well, it depends on the language, and it's got to be approved by the judges in the probate, the bankruptcy, all the different things if the bankruptcy is still ongoing. So there's a lot of hoops to go for. I think what now is there has been an agreement reached. Agreements have to be approved. Other creditors have to be in the loop. So a very complex process as this goes on. But to me, the most significant thing is the Browns are still going after assets they think were hidden after their $33 million
And the Goldmans,
judgment.
yeah.
The Goldmans.
Yeah, we're mainly hearing from the Goldmans. We really haven't heard much in recent years from the Brown family.
No, we haven't.
And they remained close on some level to O.J. Simpson for several years. So there you have it. That's the latest on that. Now, here is breaking news. The Department of Justice admits, just in the last few minutes, full grand jury never reviewed the final Comey indictment. So, Greg, what say you about this? How does this impact this case?
You know, I have never, in doing this for over 3 decades, in a lot of high-profile cases and whatever, I have never seen a case of this procedural posture when the government, the Department of Justice knows, the world is watching. And one of the most fundamental requirements of an indictment is there has to be a finding by a grand jury. Typically, in state court, this is a federal grand jury, 13 people meet in secret, and then they determine if there's probable cause. That is, whether it's more likely than not that a criminal offense occurred. The defense lawyer can't go, your client can't go, so it's a process that is controlled exclusively by the prosecution. But what happens is they have to vote and return an indictment. You can't at the last minute switch bait, do this. So that is going to be, it's actually a bombshell revelation how you can continue with an indictment that was never approved by a grand jury.
Let me read you what we're seeing here, and we're just putting this on our website, WATE.com. We pulled it up for you here, but let me read this. And so here's the deal. Instead of presenting a new indictment to the full panel after it rejected one of the counts, Interim U.S. Attorney Lindsay Halligan gave the grand jury's foreperson an updated version not seen by other grand jurors to sign.
It's remarkable, and here is the flavor of this case. And what I think you're seeing is a clash of the court, the judiciary, and the executive branch. That's going to it's going to be a collision, and I don't know how you're going to pick up the pieces when these two trains collide, because the judge has already made a number of statements and findings sua sponte throughout these pretrial rulings. One, he has said it appears the prosecution has chose to indict first, investigate last, and is concerned why there's no discovery ready and why it's not ready to be provided to the defense counsel. The second thing that is interesting, Comey's lawyers have raised vindictive prosecution, saying that this is politically motivated, which is completely forbidden by the Department of Justice guidelines, mandates, etc. Commonsensical. It's the Department of Justice.
And they're calling for this whole thing to be dismissed because of that.
Right. And the thing the judge asked, now this is a federal judge, looked at a prosecutor and said, is there a declination memorandum that says this case should not be presented? Ask yourself why that would be important. Well, as a criminal defendant, you are entitled to what's called Brady evidence. That means evidence that is exculpating or favorable to your defense. Obviously, if your defense is this is a vindictive political prosecution, and you had the investigators and lawyers say your client did nothing wrong, it is clearly favorable. It is clearly could be exculpatory. And when the judge posed that question, apparently the U.S. Attorney, Assistant U.S. Attorney was there, said, I am instructed not to answer.
Let me bring you up to date, everyone. Comey, obviously an outspoken critic of the president, during leaving his first administration, says that the president's personal spite that we brought up was the impetus of that 2-count indictment, stemming from 2020 testimony he gave Congress, brought just days before the statute of limitations was set to expire.
And I want to be clear, when we're commenting on this, I'm not talking whether, I'm not pro-Comey,
right,
pro-anti-Comey, I'm not pro-President, POTUS, anti-POTUS. I'm just talking about in the federal court universe, when you do things are typically done in a very orderly fashion. And that is, you have the evidence, you have the investigation, you have the discovery ready when you go to a grand jury. Grand juries are completely autonomous. You cannot taint, influence a grand jury. And the grand jurors have to vote for a true bill or return that indictment. So those are all going to be big factors going forward on if the judge, now here's going to be where the collision we talked about.
And let's wrap it up real quick because we need to go back
trains.
to Wendell Burkhart.
But two trains, is the judge going to sanction the Department of Justice, or is he going to dismiss this case?
We'll see.
We'll see.
Keep it tuned right here online and on the air. Now let's go back. We haven't heard back from Wendell, who said, I saw a lawyer last night in the OJ case saying it wasn't true. Not sure what you were talking about. If you want to let us know what you were talking about, go ahead and leave a comment in chat. But in the meantime, we're going to have to close it out here right now. Brought you a lot of information today, as always. Thank you for being with us. And we're going to talk more about the OJ settlement with the Goldman family coming up at 5:30. We'll see you then. Thanks for being with us.